All right, we are back. It's Monday morning. We're recharged and recaffeinated here, and we're ready to get this new power maker installed on this Chevy Cruze here. And good thing for us, it was in stock, if that says anything. But before we get that far, I just want to talk about a few things on here. A few things you may have to switch over if you're not replacing, and kind of just show you some of the stuff that you may not have seen when we removed it. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is these two lines here, and these are the two coolant lines. This is the one that was leaking that we had to detach from the driver's side. And this one right here is the one that was kind of hard to see that we had to use a bolt. This is the one that attaches to the block with this banjo bolt here. And we'll explain a little bit more of this when we get back to the car. Now, if we flip this thing over, you can see this is the oil line that we removed. This is why we had to remove the cat, so we could get to these two bolts. And if we go back to the other side here, here is the top oil feed that we removed that when we first started this job off. Now, looking at this turbo, it looks pretty close to the original one, or to the new one, I should say, but that's because this is a 15. Now, if you're replacing this, and your car's a little bit older, you may notice that the wastegate here might look a little differently. Maybe the solenoid looks different. I think they even did a little bit of redesign to the bypass here too. So if it does look a little different, now this one doesn't, don't panic. They did redesign this for sure, I know. So now, before we get this thing back on, I'm gonna show you here, we have to either take these and install them over here, which I really don't recommend. These are actually little quick connect fittings, and here's the new one, and there's a little groove here. It's probably hard to see, and then if you look inside here, there's a little snap ring, and this thing just kind of snaps in there. Now, they do make a special tool. You can try to get it out, but you're gonna have a heck of a time, and for about 25-30 bucks, you can get some new fittings, a little bit more if you do the hoses, but I recommend it because you really don't want to do this again. So for what we're going to do, instead of removing them, we're just going to install our new ones in this turbo and then just snap the new lines in before we get it on the car here. And these tighten down to 15 foot-pounds. Doot doot. Make sure the seal is installed on here before you torque them down too. And it's a lot easier to do this on the bench. If you forget, you do not want to try to install these on the car. Okay, so now that our fittings are on, we just have to get our new hoses on. And make sure that you put the right hose in the right location. The one with the rubber connection here is the one that goes on the top.
Closest to the manifold.
And you may want to lube these up a little bit, just with a little bit of engine coolant, because that's what what goes through the pipe. Just don't want to roll the O-ring inside there. Just get it in there. And you should just hear a click, and it'll snap right in there, and you should be good to go. Now, if you happen to put the wrong one in, I recommend just unscrewing it and moving it over rather than to try to get it out. Unless you have the special tool, you really might mar this thing up trying to get it out. Now, the other one I'm going to click in when we get over to the car because I kind of want to show you how it installs on the block. So let's get over there and I'll show you that. Okay, so here is that second coolant tube that I'm going to install in the turbo. But before I install it in the turbo, I kind of want to explain where this goes and how we got it off because it was kind of hard to see when we removed it. Now, this actually gets bolted to the block under this tube here, and it just kind of screws in and it torques down. Now, why I want to talk about this is because this is the part that actually has the special tool. Now, we don't have the special tool, but you can get away without it as long as you're very mindful. Now, what the special tool does is it holds this collar here. So when you tighten this down, you torque it, as soon as it catches, it's going to want to bend this. You know, it's going to want to try to twist this tube, and if you twist it, you're going to restrict the coolant and maybe even wreck the tube. So what the special tool does is it holds this collar so you can torque this down without it trying to move or kink. So what we're going to do is once we get this thing starting to torque down, we're going to try to get a screwdriver or a pry bar in here to hold it to restrict it from trying to kink when we torque it down. And that's something you're going to have to do unless you have the tool to do that. And we'll kind of explain that a little more once we kind of get it installed here. But for now, I'm just going to put this in the turbo and we'll get on to installing the rest of the turbocharger. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is this tube right here. And this is the tube that we actually left inside the car right here. And this is the oil drain tube. This is the one that we unbolted that went up into the turbo. Now, you can reuse this, but it's made of plastic. I really don't recommend it. If this cracks, you're gonna leak a lot of oil. But it just pushes into the block almost like a dipstick tube. And there's a little latch here. So all you have to do is come down here and release that latch. With either a screwdriver or pick, pull it up, and it should come right out. Now, being plastic and brittle, there's a good chance it's going to break, and that's exactly why we have a new one. And this is why, if you're not replacing it, you want to unbolt it from the turbo and not try to pop this out and pop it back in, because if you can get these old crusty plastic things out without breaking it, you're a better man than me. Okay, now we're in trouble. Okay, so if you look here, the piece came out, but you can see we still have some piece stuck in there. So what we're gonna have to do is be very careful and try to get a pick in there and try to get that out of the engine, because you do not want that sitting in the bottom of your block.
What if you tried to force the new one in right now? You would push that other piece down into the oil pan, right?
Correct. And once we do get it out, you can see all this rust. What it is all the rust builds up on this side of the O-ring. The O-ring seals from here down, but all of this gets water and corrosion and stuff, and it corrodes. So the O-ring doesn't want to come up. You can see it came all the way up to where the O-ring, first O-ring is. So make sure we're going to have to try to carefully clean that up before we put the new one in as well. I'm thinking a pick for the O-rings. Once the O-rings are out, the piece should come out. Okay, here's O-ring number 1. And once you get the O-rings removed, it should come out because there won't be anything holding it in. Now I broke a tool.
Oh, no.
Don't you break on me. Okay. We got our second O-ring out.
Better out than in.
We're off to a good Monday morning here, huh? Got something stuck in a motor already. Someone's probably already commenting a better way to get this out than I'm doing.
Well, when you have time to sit and think about it, you'd come up with a better way too, but, you know, on the job, filming the job. By the way, years of holding the flashlight for my dad has trained me for this exact moment.
I should probably start yelling at you.
At least I can't burn your arm with this LED light.
Old drop light, the metal shield on it. The worst is if you drop that drop light, then the bulb would break, and you had to go get another bulb. There's a little piece, and there's one more in there that I can see, and we should be good. Okay, so we got it out finally, but we still have to clean up the lip in here. Otherwise, the new one's not going to go in. So we're going to use a brush to clean that out, but we don't want any contaminants in the engine. So what we're going to end up doing is we're going to drain the oil on here anyway, because we're doing the turbo job. We're going to shove some oil and some stuff. We're going to flush this out when we're done, just to make sure we get this all cleaned out once we get that lip off of there, because you don't want this to go into the oil and then use that oil in the engine. Okay, we got this thing all cleaned up. We flushed some oil down here just to make sure if there's any little debris or something, it would make it in the pan, and then we're going to flush it again when we change the oil. I'm pretty sure, almost guaranteed, no plastic got in there, but maybe a little bit or two of the corrosion could have gotten there. We're not going to take any chances. Here is our new tube. You can see the two sealing O-rings right here, and we generously lubricated this with new oil too, because we want to make sure that it doesn't roll or anything happen to the O-ring when we get this new one in here. And it should just push in here nice. And when it's seated, the little clip underneath here will be under the metal piece that holds it in. And you can see how easy that went in once we got that all cleaned up, and that should be ready to go. Now, if you look here, I got this cleaned up Friday before we left here. So we got this whole surface cleaned up where the exhaust manifold portion seals to the engine. And we had all the studs out. Most of them came out with the nuts. So we're going to put new studs in there just because it's easier and it's better than just extracting all the nuts off the studs when they're stuck on there. Now, they're kind of a unique design stud. There's nothing to turn them in. There's no middle piece. It's just a straight stud. So we're going to start by putting them all in by hand, and then we'll lock them in a little bit before we put the manifold on. Now, whatever you use to tighten these down, don't crank them down. They don't have to be He-Man tight. They just need to seat. You know, once you get them seat, maybe like 1/8 of a turn, and you're good to go. Now we'll get our gasket on, and this thing actually only goes on one way. If you look at that little ear here, if you try to put it on this way, it'll get stuck on the head. It actually has to be flipped this way with the round edge on this side. So we'll get that slipped on there. And I think we're ready to put that turbo on. Where's that power maker? Okay, now before you put the turbo on, make sure that your gasket is on your oil drain tube. And if you look at this turbo here, we have the banjo bolt installed on this hose already with both washers. And those washers, or those sealing washers, will hold that banjo bolt on. You can see this thing ain't gonna fall off. Now, why that's important is because it's a lot easier to get this thing installed without trying to feed all this stuff in there once it's installed. Just make sure that you don't get, a bunch of crud in there when you install it. And we got it cleaned up pretty good. So we'll get this thing installed down on here.
Now, do you leave the caps on for a reason when you put this thing in?
Yeah, I like to leave the caps on because it prevents any contamination, anything from getting in there. The big thing I'm doing right now is making sure that the lower coolant tube is staying in the spot that I want it to be and not falling below, because what just happened is the coolant tube actually fell down here and it actually gets screwed in here. So you want it to lay up here, otherwise you'll get stuck and you won't be able to swing it into the right spot. So you want to kind of hold it up while you get the manifold down. It's also not a bad idea to take this out, because if you hit it and snap it off, you got to buy a dipstick. The cost of dipsticks these days is ridiculous. Nice and easy here. Okay, so it seats up perfect here. We can see down here that our coolant tube is laying down there, but it's on the right spot, so we should be able to get that installed relatively easy. Now let's just get a couple nuts started here. You can see we got our shiny new brass, copper, whatever nuts here. And they have little dimples on, so they won't screw flat until you get a wrench on them. So there is that dimple, and that dimple is kind of like a locking feature. That's why you can't screw, that's hand tight, and you see that gap between it hitting the manifold. And that's normal, and that's good because that'll help you screw the stud all the way in before you seat them down.
I mean, you could get the ratchet.
I will get the ratchet. See, what I like to do is I like to make sure that they're all started before I get the ratchet out. Mike likes to follow the cross threads tight type
cross threads are better than no
yeah,
threads.
cross threads are better than no threads method.
That's only true on lug nuts.
And guess what, guys? Guess what we warned you about and we forgot to do? I don't know how many times I've done this. Now, I've put these things on more than one time forgetting to put this on. This really needs to be there. And guess what you get to do if you torque all the bolts down, get everything done, and then find this laying in your toolbox. And here it is. I even set it here so I wouldn't forget it. And I have all these started, and my special bracket is not installed. We'll be right back. I got these all started now. Now I got to get these sequenced because they get torqued to a specific sequence in a certain order. We're going to snug them down to the sequence, and then we'll torque them after we have them snugged down. Get our dipstick put back here. All right, the next thing I want to do is I want to get that coolant tube down here installed. And this is going to be probably the most challenging part of this job, is to get that coolant tube. And it's kind of hard to see. We'll see if we can get you a shot here. Getting that thing installed in the block. Okay, so how I'm going to do is I'm going to stick my hand under the turbo, and you can see I actually have enough room with the cat remove that I can move this up and down. And I'm going to have to do that to get it aligned into the hole in the block. Now, before I do that, I'm going to stick a socket through here and get a socket ready to start this. And you're going to want to start this by hand with a socket once you get it that far. Now just spin it by hand until you get it to kind of seat by hand. You don't tighten it yet because you don't want to kink that hose. Okay, so this is just a little door panel tool. You could use whatever you can fit in there. And I want to do is I want to get underneath here and hold this up when I torque it, so that this tube does not kink when I tighten it down. And that's kind of what my worry is. How does it look now? Can you see the tube at all?
It's nice and straight. It's pretty snug already.
Okay, so once you get it snug, now you're going to want to torque that and keep holding it to 22 foot-pounds. And there we have it. And if you can see down there, that thing comes straight out, and you just got to make sure that you do not bend the hose. That's really the whole key of the operation there. Okay, we're going to go in a little different order than we took it apart because we don't want to keep going up and down with the car. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get the other coolant hose attached. And believe it or not, all the parts that it comes with, it doesn't come with a new clamp. So got to switch our clamp over from the old hose. That up in there. Make sure that this heat shield is over all the rubber parts of the hose. It definitely is on there for a reason. And then we'll get that hold down bolt in right away. And that'll be 71 inch-pounds.
Critical torque spec there.
Yeah. I'll torque this down to our 71 inch-pounds. Almost worth it. Now this is the plug that was for the oil tube. Good thing to do with these, save it, put it in a box. Next time you do this job, you don't have to stick the bolt back in there. You can just reuse these plugs, save you a bunch of time. Yeah. Now we got our new oil tube here. Comes with a new bolt and new washers. This is going to feed back here, and then it's going to go in here. I'm just going to clean that out though to make sure there's no junk in there. It also wouldn't hurt to lube this up with a little bit of engine oil. I'm just going to feed this in from the back side, make sure it's behind there. Start that, and then this will just push in there and then seat. Get this seated down. Then there's another bolt that holds this in. Again, 71 inch-pounds. This is gonna be 15 foot-pounds. Okay, so we got both of our coolant lines installed. We got our top oil line installed. Now we're gonna go underneath it and we're gonna get that bottom oil tube installed down here. And we're also gonna put the cat on while we're down there. Now remember, before we put the cat on, we're gonna wanna get the clamp installed. Otherwise it can be a real pain to get it on. And remember, just because our bolt came out in our old clamp, when we took it off the turbo, it snapped in the middle there. So good thing we had a feeling about it. Remember, there's also a gasket on here. It's always a good idea to replace that. We'll get that put on there once we try to get our cat situated on here, and we should be good to go. All right, let's get underneath her. Okay, now that we're back under here, you can see this plastic notch or latch right here. This is what's locking that tube into the oil pan. That's what we have to make sure is latched. So our next step is to get the rest of this installed. So we're gonna pull this little plug out that was just in there to protect it from contaminants. And then we have our other two bolts here. And we'll just slide this into place and get these bolts started. Now if they don't line up right away, you might have to shift this around a little bit to get it to line up. This one can be a real pain, so sorry for blocking your view here. Everything's not the greatest to access in here. You really just got to do the best that you can. All right, next up the cat here. And this gasket goes on the cat first, and you can see it's got these little indexes here. This will actually hold the gasket on nice and tight. So make sure you push that in good. It'll clip in there and it won't come off. We got a new gasket for this side as well. And this only goes on one way. You can see it's not a true triangle. Again, it's got little cutouts that'll hold it on. Okay. Now remember, it has two mounting or two things that hold it tight, and you're going to want to try to get those in first. But you don't want to tighten these yet. You got to make sure the exhaust cat or the cat is tightened down before you tighten these, but you definitely want to make sure that they're lined up, and maybe even just get the bolts started on them. This will ensure that the thing doesn't come down on your head. And remember, there's that one that goes back here. Okay.
Here's just snug, or just.
And since I have to move this thing around possibly to get that top to line up, I'm just going to start these about halfway by hand too, because I might have to do a little shimmy and shake to get that to line up there. And since I have to come back under here to tighten these anyway, it's not a big deal. And this might not be a bad time to start draining your oil too. Anytime you do this job, especially if you might have a little contaminants in the oil or something, and it's just good practice to put some fresh oil in here. Pull it as soon as possible, let it drain for a long period of time, make sure you get all that crud out of there, and we're also going to do that. It's also a good time to check to make sure you got enough room in these things. Ask me how I know.
Never overfilled an oil drain in my life.
That is the sense of panic that you'll never forget. Hopefully you know where the plug is, or you know where another pan is pretty quickly. And we're gonna let that drain forever. We're gonna get all that old oil out of there. It doesn't even hurt sometimes to even pour a fresh quart down just to flush everything out of the pan in case you think maybe something got in there. Okay, now we gotta get this thing seated flush before we tighten this clamp. Don't overextend this clamp too far because you can wreck it. Just get it tight like that. You can see now it's seated. And then get the clamp over both pieces. Make sure you're over both pieces, and if you are, you should be able to kind of slip it. Let's keep moving this around here. Okay, switch. There we go. And the position of this bolt matters. You have to kind of get it down kind of as far as you can. I like to go just about parallel with the oxygen sensor. Now don't crank this down too far. It's not the strongest where it flexes. This torques down to 115 inch-pounds. Okay, now we can get some of our other stuff plugged in here. We get our oxygen sensor back together. Oop. Okay, now we're gonna get our intercooler pipe attached down here. Make sure you seat it all the way up. There's a lot of pressure on there when this thing builds up boost. If you ever have that guy that over tightens everything, that's Mike. No. Blame him.
I run it snug with the ratchet and then check it by hand after.
All right, that's good. Now we have our turbo bypass here.
Careful, you're hooked over here.
And be careful, these plastic tubes love to break. It's their favorite thing to do. Shouldn't have said that because I don't want to break this one. I'm gonna get this plugged in first before that tube is in the way. And remember that this thing is held on by a clamp. That clamp's gotta go back on. Okay. Got a bypass tube on here. Now this just pushes on. It should clip in there. Maybe this wasn't that cool. Okay, so we have our bypass tube on, our bypass solenoid plugged in, and our PCV hose bypass tube on. Everything should be good to go here. Now this is going to be the tube for the air cleaner. Doesn't hurt to just throw this on right away while we're up here. Good thing too is check to make sure that you don't have any tears or anything in here before you put it back on. That's also another thing that likes to happen on these. Don't want to lose any of that power. Okay. Now there's one thing we forgot to mention before. On the turbo here, there's these two little studs. This is for the heat shield that goes over this turbo, and this thing came to us with the heat shield off of it, so we don't actually have it right now. But you're gonna have to take these out and put them into the new turbo or the new exhaust manifold so you can get that heat shield on. That's important to have on there. And we have it and we will have it, we just don't have it right now. Here they are removed. They just screw in here. Torque's not critical. Just be mindful that they're not the thickest or strongest, so don't snap them off. Last thing you want to do is snap something off in your new turbo. I'm just going to snug them down. My new favorite ratchet here. Okay, so this should be everything that's buttoned up on the top. Just got to get that shield back on. Everything else we need to do is underneath it, so let's get at it. Okay, we got all the oil drained out of here. It's been draining for quite a while. Get our drain plug back here so we don't get dripped on.
This is one of those cross threads are better than no threads cases.
Yeah, right, because this bolt doesn't have to come in and out all the time.
Wonder what the torque spec on that is.
I think it's 14 Newton meters. Just to be consistent here, we'll torque these down. Perfect.
I mean, it's not bad practice to be in of torquing drain plugs.
Yeah, because the rate in which drain plugs strip out, even if you do everything correctly, you can always say it wasn't my fault when you're torquing them down. All right, we're gonna get these bolts tightened up. Ooh. All right, we're gonna torque these down to 16 foot-pounds. Now we just gotta snug down our bracket bolts. And again, I don't think torque is critical on these. Just make sure that they're snug down. Okay, should be good to go. Let's get some oil in here and cool it and fire it up. All right, it's nice to do just a quick mental checklist that you got everything installed and on correctly before we get too far. We got our coolant tubes hooked up, the one that was leaking, the one that goes in the block. We got our top oil feed, our bottom oil feed. We got our intercooler pipe. We got the wastegate and the bypass stuff hooked up. The exhaust is all ready to go. It's torqued down. Let's just get oil in her.
25 Newton meters. Right?
Yeah, right.
I think, right? It would be 25 or 35. I think they say on the cap.
I think they are 25. I'm not sure. What do you guys think about these media filters? I mean, they're on everything now. I mean, I don't know. I think they do a good job, but I still love them can filters, Mike. I don't know. They just take them off, throw them in trash, put a new one on.
These things always, they just make a mess too.
I know. And I mean, it is nice to be able to see what you filtered out sometimes, you know. Yeah, but you know, if you see some metal or something in there, but I honestly, I think they're just kind of a pain. Oop. This is 25 Newton meters, and these are actually really important to torque. I see so many people just crank these down so tight and create oil leaks and maybe cause the next guy to break it, you know, then blame it on him. Now you've seen me use this airlift to put coolant in cars before, and you don't have to have one, but the reason I really like to use this is because it puts a vacuum on the system, and then you can see if it holds a vacuum. And by seeing that it can hold a vacuum, you know that all of your coolant connections are good and the thing's not leaking. And a lot of times you can find a problem that you have before you put coolant in it, make a mess, and then have to go back and fix it. This way you can fix the problem before you fill it with coolant, and it's a much more efficient way to do it. Now you can see this coming to a vacuum, and it should go into the green. Normally it'll go below 25 even, or above 25, once all the air's out of the system. Just let it go for a while until the needle stops moving. Okay, now when you think that you got all the air out of the system, what I like to do is close it, disconnect the air, and then just wait a little bit and make sure that that doesn't start coming up. If it holds that vacuum for a little bit, it proves that your system is sealed and you don't have a coolant leak anywhere. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna bring it up here. Now, it's always nice to try to get as much air out of the hose as possible. Get this clipped on, open it up. Make sure this is in the bottom of the jug so you don't suck any air, and let her fly. Now watch this hose. If you see that it starts sucking air, you got to refill your coolant jug. I like to use a big bucket if I have one too. It always works a little better than coming right out of the jug. Make sure we got everything cleaned up here. You really want to be as clean as possible when you add fluids to a car too, because if you spill coolant or you spill oil everywhere, then you're not going to know if you have a leak when you've opened both systems up. You want everything to be completely new and dry so you can check it after you get this thing running. I think we're at the moment of truth here. We got oil in it, got the cap on, everything should be good to go. What do you say we fire it up and watch the power produce itself?
Fire in the hole!
Okay, we just got back from a test drive and this rocket is ready for the road. We made sure the boost pressure was good. We made sure there's no leaks and everything checked out. So it's ready to go back to the customer. Thanks for sticking with us through this repair. If you liked what you've seen, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Click that bell icon. We love the support from you guys. And as always, thanks for watching.